I don't know what it is about games being set in these post-apocalyptic environments these days, but it certainly seems to be the year for it with games like Metro Exodus, Rage 2, and case in point, The Division 2. The Division was entry number 458 in the Tom Clancy series of video games, and the original was released in 2016. Developed by Massive Entertainment and Ubisoft, who've got an affinity for open world games and reusing the same IP. And they've just released the sequel, The Division 2. And if you didn't get enough of shooting people in highly detailed city streets in the first game, well, then this one might just give you your fill. This review took me a bit longer than normal because this is a game that genuinely takes a really long time to get through. Like, it's almost offensive how much content there is in this game, and it's downright overwhelming at times. So, The Division 2 takes place a few months after the first game, where the flu virus that affected New York City has now spread to Washington D.C. and turned the place into a quarantined war zone, with the military clashing with hostile factions to maintain control, and innocent civilians caught up in the middle.
Welcome to D.C.
Now, I'd be lying if I said I understood what was happening at the beginning of this game, but as far as I can tell, you're a Division agent sent to DC to assist with taking back the city from a paramilitary group called the True Sons. Other enemy factions do show their hands later on, like the Outcasts and the Hyenas, who all sound like punk rock bands from the early 2000s. And your ultimate goal is to reboot the SHD network and drive all of these assholes out of town. Luckily, I think this is a game that you can get into without having played the first one. Like, all you really need to know, you're one of the good guys and everyone else that's not a civilian should just be shot in the head on sight. The Division agents aren't Solid Snake or Sam Fisher, like these guys are about as subtle as a bull in a china shop. So the rules of engagement is basically just shoot first and ask questions later. It's downright cheesy stuff at times, like you're fighting big guys in these huge armoured suits that look like the Juggernaut. And at one point there's even a boss fight against the Fury from Metal Gear Solid 3.
My shoot's been ripped!
So a realistic tactical squad-based shooter this is not. Now let me just get one thing out of the way straight up in terms of the presentation. Holy shit, is this a good looking game. Now this might be, I think, one of the most visually dense games I've played this year and just one of the best looking games I think I've ever played. Like seriously, it's fucking stunning. The sheer amount of detail on offer is just staggering. Like, to think that people have spent all this time modelling something as intricate as individual leaves on a footpath. And it's a level of quality that extends to interior and exterior environments. Even down to the way that you can shoot the concrete off a wall, piece by piece. Like, it's just insane. It almost seems kind of polarizing with the character models, which aren't bad, but they seem almost juxtaposed with the photorealistic and incredibly intricate game world. And the best part, it seems to run pretty damn well. The Division 1 on launch ran worse than an old man with emphysema, but the Division 2 holds a pretty rock solid frame rate pretty much the entire time. The Division 1 was also a game that had incredible sound design and an awesome soundtrack, and this is carried across to the sequel. The gun sounds in this game are the kind of stuff that sends blood rushing to certain body parts, and the soundtrack is just so dope. The music is more of a soundscape than a soundtrack, serving as a way to heighten the tension or the action during a particular section, and it's really underrated stuff. I think the best music tracks are the ones that just do their own thing in the background, serving as a way to accentuate the action, and this is exactly what the music does. I think the controls too are borderline perfect, and the only thing I still find really finicky is snapping to cover. Also, there's some weird bullshit going on with hit detection sometimes, though I think this might be latency or connection issues. But once you get the hang of it, I think you'll agree the controls and the gunplay are just really smooth and seamless. Compared to another third-person shooter I played recently, which I won't name, but everyone acted like that game had the best shooting controls ever, even though it felt like I was underwater the whole time I played it. And this is really what you want too, considering the combat is really intense at times. The Division 2 doesn't wait all that long to start putting you into these hectic gunfights, and one thing you're likely to notice early on is just how aggressive the AI is. These guys don't mess around, they hate you and they're quick to show it. Aside from just being really good at flanking you if you're not paying attention, they'll also throw grenades to flush you out of cover, and some enemy types are going to rush your position with a melee weapon or a shotgun. Now this is a cover shooter, but it's not really the type of cover shooter where you just hunker down in one spot and kill everything. I mean, you can for a time, but you're going to need to be on the move a fair bit, and like they say, the best defense is a good offense. There's a fair bit going on with the way you can deal with the enemies too, from suppressing them so you can advance on their position, or igniting nearby barrels or gas canisters to set them on fire. It's a pretty deep combat system that gets overshadowed, I think, by the spongy nature of some of the enemy types. Guns are broken down into categories like assault rifles, shotguns, pistols, and that sort of thing, and the major thing that differentiate weapons is obviously damage, but also accuracy, firing rate, magazine size, and reload time. I usually just used whatever the best version of an assault rifle was that I could find. Like, rifles and shotguns didn't really seem all that useful to me, and being able to unload like 50 rounds into someone's head before reloading seemed to work the best. The options for the loadouts is like really deep too, from like all the various weapons and attachments you can equip through to prioritizing things like health and armor over skill power. Like, it's really complex. Regardless of what gun you're using, you'll just notice how over the top the combat is. Especially when you're getting into some of the final missions in the game, like it's just balls to the wall action. And where the whole thing really shines is when you're playing in a full squad. Now I think playing solo is fine if you're just off free roaming, but when you're doing the main missions, you really want to be playing it with 3 other people. Obviously it just makes things seem more epic, and with other people you're not the only one getting shot at. But a full squad also affects how damage scaling works, making the missions much more challenging, and ultimately I think more enjoyable. You really have to use your abilities as best you can, or else the AI is just going to mow you down. And I think that might be one of the main issues I had with this game, is that some areas just don't feel designed with solo play in mind, because there's often just way too many enemies to deal with in certain missions. The game's idea of making something challenging is just throwing a bazillion enemies at you, and having them fire with perfect accuracy from any distance. Now this is fine in co-op, because when you're not the only one being shot at by fucking Hawkeye from the Avengers, you can at least focus on flanking and taking them out. But in solo play, you just feel like you're standing in front of like a firing squad or something. And even when I'd spent all this time earning good gear through crafting and side missions, it's staggering how fast you can often get overwhelmed when you're playing by yourself. But I mean, like, maybe that's a good thing though, like it shows how intelligent and clever the enemies can be. Luckily, if you haven't got friends to play with because you're some kind of loser, the matchmaking is still pretty easy. You just kind of click on the mission you want to do and you look for other people doing it at the same time. And even when I was playing this before launch, this only ever took me no more than like a couple of minutes to find someone to play with. Most people playing the game also seem to have a pretty good head on their shoulders, and generally speaking, they don't run around like idiots or get themselves killed, and this is a good thing. One thing that I think really makes The Division 2 more enjoyable and improves upon the first game is just how better the missions are structured. In the first game, it really felt like you only did a couple of missions per area and then like a bazillion side things. Now, there's still a bazillion side things to do, but they're somehow not as overwhelming and they're more of an optional distraction. At least until you get to level 30, but I'll talk about that soon. What's also good is that side missions are going to scale to your level, so you don't have to worry about over leveling, and you'll always get some kind of benefit from doing them regardless of your progress. Each area has a safe house and usually 4 SHD caches to collect, which are what you use to upgrade your abilities and perks. And then you also need to complete 3 activities, which are basically world events, and then give a certain amount of supplies to friendly control points. Once all of this is done, you get a bounty for like the head honcho in the area and then have to kill them. And this makes up all of the side stuff you need to do in each zone.
Target. Nice.
I mean, you can keep going back and doing these until you bleed out of your asshole, but it's not necessary for completion from that point on. I also felt that coming across these activities felt more natural, like I'd be walking down the street and just happen to see a bunch of bandits about to execute someone. It felt more like an existing game world that I was interacting with instead of it just being another blip on the map. The Division 2 also has a lot of nice little features that just improve the experience on a basic level. Like how now you only need to craft a weapon attachment once and then it's always in your inventory. Inventory management is still super intuitive, and you're able to mark items as junk and either bulk sell or deconstruct them for crafting parts. And the menu even tells you what it thinks your next best mission should be. Holy shit. After playing Anthem, which is a looter shooter lacking that looter element, it's also pretty damn refreshing to come into a game like this, which almost constantly throws new pieces of gear and weapons at the player. Seems you can't play a mission for more than 30 seconds without coming across a new piece of armor or a new gun to use. You can even equip the weapon or item right off the ground or deconstruct it. There's no need to go fiddling around with it in your inventory if you don't want to. And this is how it should be. This is what I want in my looter shooter. It is actually kind of silly at times, like when you get to around level 20 or so, loot just starts dropping so frequently that it starts to lose its appeal. And it got to the point that I was swapping out armor and weapons pretty much after every single mission. Not that this is a bad thing, I mean it does make it more engaging when you're leveling up, and that constant reward system is what I think makes the game so addictive. It also highlights another really strong element of the game, and that's the experimentation aspect it offers. Something as simple as swapping out your main gun to a different type or simply a better, more powerful version can have a huge effect on the gameplay, and of course your enjoyment factor. Now, the whole thing can feel a bit repetitive at times because truth be told, every main or side mission really just involves killing enemies over and over. And I think that is worth mentioning, in between tonguing the game's asshole. And this repetitive nature is most noticeable when you reach the endgame. Now, it took me about 20 hours to finish the main missions, then after that's finished, you've got to take down 3 strongholds, which are like the headquarters for the different enemy factions. Doing these was literally the most fun I had playing this game, and they're just so epic and over the top with the action and the set pieces that it's hard to not like them. Anyway, after you've done these, you've hit level 30 and you've reached the endgame. Now at this point, what happens is a new faction turns up that takes over DC, apparently within the span of a couple of hours. Then the game turns into Metal Gear Solid or something, and there's robot dogs running around and soldiers kitted out in futuristic looking armor. Now what you have to do is replay all of the control points, the activities, the side missions, and the strongholds all over again. Now there's slight differences in the missions, so you're not just going to be replaying them verbatim, but you are still going back to the same areas you've already completed. They also introduced 3 new specialization trees which all come with a signature weapon. Weapon stats are given a gear score as well as base damage. There's new enemy types to deal with, and every time you level up you get a high-end gear cache. To take on the strongholds again, you need a certain gear score, and to get this you basically just need to grind out activities until that score gets high enough. Once you get it to the required amount, you can then replay a stronghold and then move on to the next world tier. Because every time you do a stronghold, this new enemy faction is bulking up their reinforcements. Currently there's 4 of these tiers in game, with the next tiers coming I guess in future updates. The thing is that this whole gear score thing often doesn't make all that much sense. Like to do the next stronghold you need a certain gear score, right? But an item that has a higher score often isn't necessarily a better item. Like look at this mask, it has a higher score by 20 or something points, right? But equipping it I lose 3000 armor, 1000 health and almost 100 skill power. It almost seems counterproductive. It gets kinda weird because gear becomes less important by this point and there's almost no value attached to it. Almost everything that drops is high-end loot and it's basically just a number instead of anything else. And I kinda stopped getting excited by seeing loot drop and I was more concerned as to whether or not it was just gonna boost my gear score. And by this point it really feels like you've done all this before, especially if you've played the first game. And whilst it does have a lot of slight changes here and there which I do think improve things, a lot of the base mechanics are still just straight up reused from the Division 1, from the user interface to the abilities. Like you've still got that turret ability from before, and you can still drop down an item that heals you over time. Except now it's healing armor instead of healing your actual health because they've reworked the health system. Those cute little seeker mines are back where you can drop them on the ground and they head off and home in on nearby enemies. Even the chemical launcher, which seems new, works a lot like the first aid gun from the first game. But now aside from shooting out a healing blast, it can also shoot out acid that damages enemies over time. So there is some new stuff here and there and it has been integrated pretty well, but if you're hoping for the Division 2 to reinvent the wheel and offer up an entirely new series of mechanics, well, you're going to be disappointed. One of the main things it genuinely changes is how health works. So instead of just a health bar, you've now got armor and a health bar. Once your armor is gone, you either have to refill it using an armor kit, using one of your healing abilities, or just kill all the enemies in the area. Now this last one is not ideal. But other than that, it really just feels like a carbon copy of the Division 1. It's got the same weapon models, the same animations, in fact I think even the same cosmetic items for the most part. I guess the Dark Zone's been changed up a bit too, like unlike the first game you can actually find loot now that isn't contaminated. In fact most of it isn't, so it actually kinda motivates you to explore the area. You still need to get your contaminated stuff to a chopper to get it out of the area, but acquiring loot is now much more easier than before. But all you're doing aside from that is clearing landmarks, which are like these quick elimination missions, taking out patrols in the streets, or getting into PvP encounters with rogue agents. Something that barely happens because the Dark Zone's now been split up into multiple areas. The balancing is all kind of fucked up in the DZ2, like your level inside it is separate to your level outside. And it's never really explained how this whole thing works, like they just tell you it's normalized statistics, whatever that means. The fact that these zones are split up into multiple areas instead of just a single large zone also makes them feel less grandiose. But for me, the best aspect of the Division is the PvE side of things, so I don't really care much for this part of the game anyway.
Looks like Isaac's back up and running. Nice.
I do have to admit that I had a lot of fun playing the Division 2. And my first session with the game, I think I played uninterrupted for like 6 hours. It's just insane how much stuff there is to do. And I haven't even had time to touch on the PvP aspect of the game either. I actually put off playing this for a few days, even though I got early access, because the 45GB download turned me off and I just thought it would be more of the same and kinda bore me. And yeah, it was more of the same, but it didn't bore me. And I really enjoyed playing solo or playing in a full squad. Getting to level 30 is good value in itself, and it's going to take you at least 20 to 30 hours. And if you plan to spend more time with the endgame content, you'll spend easily the same amount of time, if not more, in the long run. So I mean, on sheer gameplay content and value alone, it's hard to not recommend the Division 2. There are minor things I could complain about, like I got weird control glitches here and there that you kind of expect in a game of this magnitude. But I think in like 30 plus hours I crashed maybe twice and got disconnected as many times. Either way, look, I think this is a pretty good game and I can't see a reason to not suggest it. Future content's really going to decide how the game fares in the coming months and years. But even with what it has on offer now, the Division is a damn good time.